Thank you. I'm a little bit of a walk-around guy. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just nervous or something like that. But a special thank you to start today. As you note, I'm the outlier. I don't hold a doctoral degree. I'm not presenting to you any original research. But when I prepare to speak with folks, I prepare in the same way. And I hope that at the end of our time together, you will say, that was a valuable use of my time. So that's how I approach our time together today. But I do want to share with you that what I'm going to talk to you about today really started in a graduate level research course in the fall of 2010. And this is a slide from a class one night that a professor sent later on, and I like to call it my crazy scribbles on a whiteboard slide. But what I was looking at, what I was drawn to at that time was accountability systems. So although my entire career has been in private school education, all of my training has been in public school education. So it's been very interesting to watch, kind of swim in both of those pools, so to speak, where in public schools the accountability system tends to be externally created and somewhat top-down mandated. And then private schools, I say that we could probably, we should probably admit to being maybe a little light on accountability. And I think that probably has to do with the fact that that's that public school thing. We measure our accountability in different ways, but certainly not in the same structure, the well-articulated structure that you're going to find in a public school world. So, as I'm going through this process of what am I going to do my research on in this class and doing the initial literature review, I kept coming back to the fact that I really started to believe as I completed this literature review that we're built to do good work, and that a robust exercise of the talents and the skills that we have, the gifts that we have within us, is really what creates a meaningful life. And that brought me back to accountability. So if that's what gives meaning to life, then really accountability then comes down to being accountable to ourselves and being accountable to the work that we set out for ourselves. So my purpose today with you is to really share my big picture view of the work we do in schools and review some of the tactical things that we're doing in the middle school at Francis Parker this year. And hopefully our outcome will be that we'll have establish a shared understanding of that meaningful work by students and teachers is really the foundation of all that we do in schools. So I always have to find a spot to put in something light. So as I thought about accountability and accountability systems with students and teachers, I also, as I was preparing today, going, okay, well, that really couldn't get rid of the image of Obi-Wan and the droids, and these are not the droids you're looking for. And it really, though, resonated for me because children, your Jedi mind tricks won't work on them. You can't really make someone learn something. And that was a problem for an educator. If you can't really make someone learn, what are we doing in schools, right? Schools are about learning. We're getting some learning done today. So I sat with that. What is it that schools do? And I figured as the head of a division at Francis Parker, I should probably have a good answer for that. So schools participate with families in the formation of their sons and daughters. It's well-educated people and good citizens. Since students can't actually be made to learn, mature, and grow into good citizens, I believe schools create environments that allow students to construct their own knowledge, environments that allow students to master skills, I love the little laser, thank you, and experience boundaries. In short, the school environment serves as the container where the messy chaos of student formation can occur. And I'll keep coming back to kind of this container model because that has a lot to do with my role as an administrator in the school. So, a couple of things about Parker. If we think about what schools are supposed to do, well, what is it that Parker actually set out to do? This is our 100th anniversary this year. We're celebrating our centennial. And the words up here at the top are from our founders. What was their goal in creating Francis Parker School? Founders' primary objective, to found a school which by its environment, its methods, its opportunities would develop the young for participation in citizenship, the world's work. And then although our school is named after Francis Parker, it wasn't founded by Francis Parker. It was founded in honor of him. So the folks that came here were familiar with the Francis Parker School in Chicago and said, wow, that's what a school should look like. And they set out to build a school that does that. So that leads me really to talking about the fact that this year was an evaluative year for us. It's a WASC year. We're getting accredited. It's a strategic planning year. And so it gave us the opportunity over the last 18 plus months to really be very self-reflective. And one of the things we did is we went back and looked at our mission statement again to make sure that it was right on. And the mission statement that we ultimately arrived at was different. We made some changes. And I think it's pretty dead on now. Our mission: to create and inspire a diverse community of independent thinkers whose academic achievements, global perspective, and strength of character prepare them to make a meaningful difference in the world. In that statement, there is nothing about preparing for AP tests. There's nothing about SAT scores. There's nothing about college admission. And I like it that way. Now, some of our parents might be thinking that, but I think if I really had a chance to sit down and talk with someone, why aren't those things in there anymore? Because that's the floor. And we don't want to talk about the floor anymore. The expectation of a student at Francis Parker is they're going to have all of the academic preparation that they need to succeed in the most demanding, the most rigorous universities in the world. But the rest, the important part, my favorite part, is this last piece: to make a meaningful difference in the world. That's not college prep, that's life prep. That's from the time that they are with us all the way through the time that they're done with their life on this planet. So, that left me with, well, what do I do as an administrator? As someone who's training at the time when I told you back in the fall of 2010, training to be an administrator, what then can you do? And it really came back to that piece about environments. So enhancing the environment, enhancing those containers is really how I view my work and how I view making meaning for my role. So, enhancing the environment, I do believe, enhances learning. Schools, I think of schools as interdependent systems. And we can talk about this both from the point of view of Francis Parker School and from the public school system. Also, it resonates with my experience as a teacher. This is my first year in the role of principal. Before that, I was a dean. But before that, I was a classroom teacher. So the majority of my experience has been in the classroom. So what do I know about the classroom? The classroom is the container where I'm entrusted with, at Parker, somewhere between 16, 17, maybe 18 at the outside students. I can't make them learn, but I can create the environment where they can construct their own knowledge. That classroom is part of a grade level team that's led by a grade level dean that helps support all the teachers in that environment. That's part of the division, middle school division, which is then part of Francis Parker School. Now, if you wanted to apply that to the public school world, the first three are probably going to be about the same, and then you could talk about this last container as the container of, say, the school district. So this year, in our centennial year, in a WASC year, in a year where we had a chance with me coming into a new role and building some new teams, what was the work that we were going to do? What was going to be the aim of the work that we did together in the place that we call Francis Parker? And we asked ourselves, should we go back to the foundation? Should we reinvestigate the things that we ultimately believe make this a special place? I was really happy when I walked in today because there's a trellis out there, and it fit perfectly with how I view the work that we've been doing this year. The three things that really have driven and undergirded a lot of what I think about how to move our entire learning community forward are IQ, EQ, and CQ. In any of our classrooms, there's a really smart person. I would argue that in any classroom, whether it's at Francis Parker School or any other school, you're going to find a teacher who's very, very smart. They've got great content knowledge, they have pedagogical knowledge, and they're moving those students along. But in a classroom by themselves, just being smart isn't good enough. And that leads to EQ, or Emotional Intelligence Quotient. The same way I was just having a conversation at the break about training graduate students here at UCSD. One of the important things to get to know is the environment that you create in your classroom through your emotional interaction with students really either benefits or inhibits how much you can move those students along in their education. So that's another important piece. And finally, the one that we're wrestling with the most is something I like to call CQ. CQ is how smart are we collectively? Collective intelligence quotient. If I have an absolutely outstanding math teacher, but that math teacher never opens his door and talks to another teacher, that brilliance, that strength is contained in one place. And that's not doing the best for our learning environment. That's not doing the best for our kids. So that's a lot of the work that we've been trying to do this year. And I've used these two kind of metaphors. A trellis, collaborative culture, that's something that I can affect as an administrator. I can say we're going to have grade level teams. I can say that we're going to have professional learning community groups. That's the expectations I'm going to set for you. So those are useful, but really, I live out in Alpine, so we get a lot of growth right about now. I was happy to see the rain, but then it also meant that now I'm out there with my lawnmower because everything's waist high. But it reminds me of a vine. Vines don't need to be told how to grow. And teachers that want to be in a community of practice with each other, they don't need me to tell them that either. And you find in similar disciplines or teachers that are in similar grade levels, they're going to reach out and make those connections naturally. But what we can do to enhance that is also to provide some of this trellis so that the vine has a way for itself to grow. So I'll tell you a little bit now about some of the tactical things that we've done this year. We started the year talking about core values, and some of the folks that have spoken before me have also talked about values, and values has such a heavy, almost loaded sense to it, because does that imply that I'm asking my values to be adopted? But instead what we did is I asked the folks at Parker, all of our middle school teachers, to imagine that we had to create Parker someplace else. What would be the things that are so important that if we went and created Parker someplace else, brand new, that those would be the values that they would hold on to? Because in this setting, I don't believe that you can prescribe values. Instead, you have to discover the values that are already there. So we did. We went through a core values exercise. We've come up with 5 that what we will do as we move forward together is make sure that anything that we're putting out there in front of the students, in front of the faculty, as far as managing change, is that consistent with community? Came up as our number 1 value. Lifelong learning. Global competency, global citizenship. If anything that I put out there to the faculty ends up being something that doesn't jive with any of those things, whether it's whole child education, then it's not a core value, and we can't go in that direction. The other thing I've asked is that our teachers consider, what does good teaching look like? Again, coming from inside of our departments, discussion in between them, discovering for themselves what do they mean when they say, well, I went into that classroom and I watched a colleague teach and I knew it was good teaching. Why? That's one of the things that we don't do all that often, but it's another way for us to increase that collaborative culture, to open the doors, to get folks to talk about teaching, to get folks to talk about practice, to get folks to talk about how their daily life has meaning because of what they're doing in the classroom every day. Working on our toolbox. This year we looked at project-based learning. Every year I would like us to take up something that we as a division look at. You might be familiar with project-based learning. It's certainly not something that's brand new in the landscape of educational discussion at the time. But again, back to making meaning in our school day. What we know about students is when they have the opportunity to take content knowledge and skill-based knowledge and put those things together and pursue a project or an actual real-world problem. That's more meaningful for them. That deepens their learning. It makes their day have more meaning. We went through department by department, seeing different examples. One of the examples that really stands out in my mind is in our geometry class. The things that we're wrestling with, one of the things that came out of our accreditation was that how can we continue to be a green school, to really, really push the envelopes of being a green school. Our geometry teacher and our assistant head of middle school, Christy Cole, brought that to her class, said, how can we do that? They went on and did the entire analysis about putting solar panels on the roof of all of our school buildings. They had a solar power provider come to their classroom and work through all that stuff with them. That's a meaningful event for those students. That's not just a day where they had to practice their math skills. One of the other things that we're looking at this year in a way to make our learning environment better is this the right tool for us? We began looking at technology and the relationship of technology to our learning environment at the beginning of the 2011 school year. A variety of faculty members went out and visited, and one of the things that we really wanted to avoid was, wow, that's bright and shiny and I want one. Instead, we asked, how can something like this, how can a piece of technology change our learning environment? How can a piece of technology make the learning environment more meaningful for students and teachers? And we answered that question first, before we even chose a device. How can we use this tool in the service of learning? We spent the year doing professional development, creating an environment where teachers are teaching teachers. And now we're ready in the fall to roll out iPads 6 through 9. Our lower school went last year, and our upper school will slowly move from 10, 11, and 12 into also offering iPads. One of the things that we've built into it as well is, what if this turns out to not be the right tool? And we hope that as things progress, within a year or two, we'll be able to reevaluate that as well. And then probably the stickiest issue, time. Time is the one resource that we can do nothing about. It's limited every day. 168 hours a week, that's all you get. So how do we use our time? We currently have a 1 through 6 daily schedule, 45-minute blocks, no passing time. Our students, I tend to think our students scurry around from place to place, and that can't be an opportunity for them to really do their best learning. So we've spent a long time up to this point looking at what are some alternate models for us. Again, in the service of saying, how do we make the day meaningful? How do we make the period of time that the students are with their teachers have the most meaning? This past week, we've brought it to a point where we were able to say, this is what we've worked out with our faculty. And now we're ready to hear from our parents. So I'm getting that feedback right now. It's colorful. But nonetheless, these are the tactical things, the ways that we look at shaping the environment so that we can make sure that our students are getting the opportunity to create their own understandings, to create their own knowledge. So shifting to the daily practice then. Teachers are practical people. They want to know, okay, I hear you, Dan, I understand what you're trying to do, but how does that become something that is real in my classroom? And so we have to talk about having a reference point. What's a reference point for us? At Parker, it's our mission and our vision. That's why I always like to start or have that somewhere up front in any presentation so that we know the direction that we're going. Clear objectives. The mission and the vision breaks down for us, for me, into what we call essential understandings. So if our foundation is essential values, beliefs formalized in our mission and vision, the next step is essential understandings that reflect those. And then from there, we go to our daily classroom practice. And so when I go in and visit a teacher, which is part of an evaluative role, part of giving them feedback on the environment they're creating, one of the questions I like to ask them is, what's your learning target for the day? And is it tied to the mission and the vision of where we're hoping the school to be moving? That's my teacher question. My favorite student question, though, the student question that they're all now starting to learn to anticipate, is I'll just sit down next to a student for a while, hang out with them, listen to the lesson for a little bit, and then when it's appropriate and quiet, I just ask, what are you learning? What's going on right now? What are you starting to understand here? And so it becomes less about what's going on in the front of the classroom and watching what teachers are doing, and more about what that student can tell me about what they're constructing in their own mind. What's the meaning that they're making? And if there's a disconnect between the two, that's when I say, okay, we have some work to do here. Because the teacher wants one thing, and the student's telling me something completely different. So it's not rocket science, it's simple. It's a pretty straightforward, is this lining up? But it really puts, for me, it puts the main emphasis on our kids. The other piece that oftentimes, you heard someone speak earlier, I think it was one of the questions or comments, is about failure. And failure is not something that schools are comfortable with. Failure is not something that schools like Parker are particularly comfortable with either. Yet it is reality, and it is, in my opinion, how we learn. We learn by pushing as far as we can, by failing, understanding why we failed, and then maybe coming at that same task again. And that's this piece. Constant corrections. We're not going to hit where we're aimed at every single time. But if we have those feedback loops, what are you learning? Asking our kids what's going on. We'll know the course corrections that we're going to need to make. Our sailing kids really like it when I talk to them about that because they say, oh, that's just like sailing, you know? Anyway. So then a lot of it is, this is a big year, as I mentioned. It's a WASC year. It's a strategic planning year. It's my first year in the role of principal. So is this something that you do all the time? Are these questions that you ask all the time? So for me, I have to think a little bit about the life cycle of our school as an organization. And I tend to ascribe to the belief that organizations behave as organic creatures. They have a lifespan that's predictable. They behave in ways, if you're attuned to them, that are predictable, which means if you poke them too hard, they'll bite you. So we're always trying to be aware of just how far we're moving the anxiety curve for people. But we do. I think at 100 years old, we're probably about here. Francis Parker School started here. It had a period of immense growth, and that immense growth has really blossomed. We've seen that happen in the last 25 to 30 years. The middle school, the division that I work in, didn't exist before 1986. So, and if you talk to folks who graduated from Parker, right now we have graduating classes that are in the neighborhood of 125. Some of our colleagues that are Parker grads, graduating classes that were around 50. So we've come through here, and now we're at maturity. If you come to our campus, you'll see that since 2009, the entire campus has been completely rebuilt, and it's a beautiful place. But now we're here. So what are we going to do? Because the next step in the way that I look at organizations is, well, the natural life cycle is going to be to descend into decline. And that's not something that we obviously want to happen. So this little red circle right here, for me, as in our leadership, whether that's our head of school, Kevin Yaley, whether that's the other division heads along with him, including me, we have to ask questions that cause this bifurcation in this curve. And then it'll have to happen again. And it'll have to happen again if we want to continue to make a better place for our kids, if we want to continue to make a place where they can construct meaning for themselves in their daily lives, and where people, teachers, administrators, can construct meaning for their daily lives as well through the work that they do. So if I were to zoom in a little bit on that, I would say it looks something like this. We plan for the future, we're implementing the plan. Monitoring and coaching is a big part of what I do. Then we start stretching, reflecting, planning for the future, but really important is maintaining those core values that we talked about at the beginning and revisiting them. And that is where I will leave you for today. So,